Thank you, you guys.
Preparing.
Interesting.
That's what I said. I know, I did too.
Oh, there are more. You're going to hit the buzzwords today, the federal buzzwords.
Oh, boy.
Areas of critical
Thank
environmental
you, you guys.
concern.
Preparing.
Personally, I think the federal government has way too much power.
We're live. We're live.
All right, let's go ahead and we will get started.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So we'll pick up where we left off the last time, which we ended with section 13 and we're on to the law enforcement section. If you guys are good with it, we can do it like we did last time. Just stop me right where if something piques your interest and you want to talk about. And
I will drop a copy off to the sheriff because I want his input. We want his input on this. I just didn't think to let him know ahead of time, but I did leave him a message that I would drop it by today.
Yeah, there's some sections in here he probably needs to take a look at just to make sure he's okay with
To
them.
Mr. De Leon, he of course could check it over too.
That's true. So. Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead. I'm on section 14.2.1, which is a law enforcement section. So Sweetwater County finds an appropriate level of service for law enforcement on federal lands is essential for all levels of government to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the county. Looks pretty straightforward there. The county supports the coordination of law enforcement, civil, wildlife resources, and recreation public use regulations among the county, cities, Wyoming Game Fish Department, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, and the state parks.
We might want to add BOR, Connie, Bureau of Rec because of the dams.
Okay,
Sweetwater County believes that the federal agency should notify the county sheriff's office immediately when there is a life-threatening situation, criminal act, project structure failure, resource contamination, natural phenomena, landslides and fire, cultural resource sites, disturbance, and/or discovery of human remains. The county supports law enforcement agreements with federal land agencies. And Sweetwater County declares that the primary law enforcement will be under the jurisdiction of the county sheriff.
That's the most important one, right, Connie?
yes. And maybe I'd even put that up as number 1,
Yeah. True.
maybe number 2.
Yep. That sounds good.
Mhm.
Forest Service and BLM use of SWAT teams and other armed law enforcement shall be coordinated with the sheriff and limited to serious federal criminal matters rather than enforcing recreation rules or traffic ordinances.
I mean, I guess if you're discussing primacy and recency, I guess I view the agreements being the second most important. That's essentially payment to the sheriff is what that is the way I looked at it.
Are you talking about under,
Yeah,
14.2.4.
oh, I know.
Yeah, so Connie just mentioned that primary law enforcement will be under the jurisdiction of the county sheriff as being
Yeah.
first. I just viewed the agreements as second because I know the sheriff has some contracts and
Oh.
there's some payments associated with that. So that's all.
Okay. Okay, on to livestock and grazing. This
Well,
is,
before we move off of this, I just want to say again
Uh-huh.
that a lot of these have been developed through experience. The BLM had guys going out and following people around and telling they were going on closed roads and roads weren't marked and threatening people. This has actually happened in this county. So that's why some of these items were developed, and Connie can speak to it more, but it was kind of an issue a couple of years ago. They had an energetic law enforcement guy and he was tracking people for weird stuff.
and Commissioner Tillman, I believe there's only one law enforcement officer right now, just even in the high desert area. So definitely
Right.
want the sheriff involved in.
And usually they work really well with them, but once in a while, you know how it is, they get a rogue employee.
Yeah. Okay. This is, the next section is a big section. It's on grazing. This is definitely out of my wheelhouse, so anything you wanted to add, Commissioner Toman, when we get into this? So Sweetwater County supports the continuation of cattle and sheep grazing on BLM and U.S. Forest Service lands at historic levels and historic seasons of use unless the permittee requests a change. Do we need Bureau of Rec in there too? Do they give grazing on BOR?
Yeah, they do at the Flaming Gorge Recreation Area, but I don't know how, because Connie, how do you deal with that one?
Well, actually, it's Flaming Gorge. It's the Forest Service that issues the permit, not Bureau of Reclamation.
Okay.
Now, I
Yeah,
know
okay.
that,
That's covered then, right?
pardon?
So it would be covered under Forest Service then.
Yes, and then
Okay.
also when there was a Bureau of Rec withdrawal, I want to say around Little Sandy or Big Sandy, that was delegated to BLM to issue the grazing permit.
And
So
that's
I wasn't
still,
aware. Pardon?
yeah, you're correct. I just want to tell the P&Z, the Bureau of Rec is still holding 250 some thousand acres of land between the Green River and Farson, as they're supposed to be turning it back to the BLM, but they have been working on it for like 10, 20 years.
Yep.
They say that it will happen eventually, but in the meantime, they had those hearings a couple of years ago. They tried to turn it into a sage grouse refuge, and I don't know, we testified and said we wanted it turned back to the BLM.
Yeah, and I thought that had occurred. I'm really surprised.
No, it has not occurred yet. I asked Kimberly and she said, well, it's close, but they had to go in and check out all of the Title V roads and oil and gas leases and verify that they were correct. And I don't know, they're still,
Well, realty is always slow. The realty
Yeah.
actions are always slow.
well, it worries me with this administration. They've tried to do another land grab, make it a sage grouse refuge, but I haven't heard anything that they're moving that way
Yet. Okay,
Okay, so the next 15.3.2, which states the county supports the 2004 report and recommendations of the statewide Bighorn Domestic Sheep Interaction Working Group. Cooperate to address the transmission of disease from domestic sheep to bighorn sheep.
Connie, on that one, the Wyoming legislature adopted that report.
oh, good.
It's in Wyoming legislation now.
Then
of
I
how
will
to-
incorporate that citation.
Yeah, because actually I helped form that group. We met with Senator Thomas and Governor Mead to put a working group together because they were having issues with the domestic sheep and the bighorn sheep. So that's why we developed protocols of how they could work together or whatever.
Sweetwater County supports maintaining or increasing forage allocation for livestock grazing and sports monitoring to document range conditions and causation for any changes. The county opposes.
Connie, maybe you can talk about suspended use. Every BLM permittee has suspended use.
Okay, I will add a policy about suspended use.
If the range is good, every permit usually has, so you have so many animal units that you can graze, and then they'll have a section over here says suspended use that they put in limbo, saying that they want to stay there until the range was restored, but they never let it go back to grazing. So that's why I'm asking her to talk about it.
Yeah,
Right
I
there.
will insert a policy that says BLM should restore suspended use when resource conditions conform to rangeland health standards.
And maybe it can be used as a flexibility thing too.
Yes,
Make it flexible, so it's not maybe never
so,
able.
it can be used, suspended use can be activated in when appropriate and when needed.
Okay.
Good
The
point.
The county opposes decrease in livestock grazing permits and grazing allocations below present levels without considering the impacts of fire and drought and without at least 5 years of monitoring data. the county opposes the retirement of any grazing units through purchase or conversion of permits.
Well, and that environmental groups have come in and tried to buy up your grazing permits, but Connie, talk to the legal thing. It's illegal for them to do it, but you know, it's been done, and our family has done it too because of the bighorn sheep in the forest. We ended up taking a buyout just because we could see they were going to cancel our permit.
Well, and the Forest Service rules are different. BLM has always required that if you acquire a grazing permit, you can't just vacate it or leave it vacant, that you actually have to actively manage it as a grazing permit. And that doesn't mean Wildlife Federation couldn't hold a grazing permit, although for a long time they had to be in the livestock business. All it does require is that the permit be used in the livestock business. So it can't be just to raise, say, wild horses, because that wild horses don't qualify as domestic livestock. And so, if you want to add some flexibility here for when permittees really need to sell, I can. But maybe
No, I
we
think
could
you should
say-
leave it per the law.
Okay,
So I got a question. So let's say an environmental group wants to have one of these grazing permits and they put 10 goats out there and say, okay, this whole X amount of acres is being used because these 10 goats on there. Is there any language you can put in there that says you can't do that, because all they're doing is restricting the cattle and the sheep grazing and for 10 goats?
we can, because BLM rules are very clear that they have to fully stock the permit within 2 years. And a grazing permit can only be held for domestic livestock grazing. It's specifically defined in the statute. And I will add the key phrases domestic livestock, because again, buffalo has been kind of an issue, at least in North and South Dakota. And I think in Wyoming, you probably have some state laws that limit introduction of buffalo. But that's been an issue, but they have 2 years to stock. They have to show that they're grazing livestock. And Nature Conservancy had a ranch in Wyoming. Oh, I want to say 30 years ago.
Red Canyon,
Okay. And
they still have it.
okay. And, at least at that time, when they originally came in, they were grazing. They had livestock. Bob Budd ran the ranch. As I said, it's a long time ago.
No, it's still going on, as far as I know.
Okay. But, Nature Conservancy in Arizona and New Mexico bought the ranches and just put the permits into non-use. And that was illegal because, if you do non-use for conservation, you have to show there's an actual reason. You've got to revisit that decision every year. And Nature Conservancy just wanted to call it non-use and not do anything. And that just doesn't conform to the rules. And that's why BLM adopted a regulation, which the district court set aside and the 10th Circuit agreed that the law does not permit continuous non-use. That instead a grazing permit is intended for domestic livestock grazing. It has to be used as that. So I'll cite back to that.
Well, and maybe you need to say, they will never, supposedly if it's in non-use and never used, that it's supposed to be made available to other permittees who might want it. But that never happens.
But that's also in the rules. The rules require BLM to make it available to other permittees on a non-renewable basis.
Well, maybe you need to add it in there just
Yeah,
to
I will add
emphasize
that.
it. Because again, the purpose of this plan is to hold the feds' feet to the fire for their own rules.
Right.
Because they try to duck and dodge, and I know permits that just disappeared off the books. They just kind of.
That's particularly true with the Forest Service. We've seen it in Colorado, where northwestern Colorado lost a huge number of grazing permits and are never restored. And you've been seeing it in the Bridger Teton now for going on 20 years.
Okay, another
Okay.
question. Okay, so let's see here. The federal land agency should properly coordinate, consult, and cooperate with permit holders and the county in making changes to their permits. Sweetwater County supports efforts to manage nuisance species that are detrimental to federal rangelands.
What's that, Connie?
Well, that's basically a slam at wild horses, but it's also any other game species, really non-native species that would get loose. For example, if you had someone was raising goats, they let their goats go wild, and all of a sudden you've got goats all over the place. You know, maybe that's not a high likelihood in Wyoming, but it has happened in other areas where the goats survive better, fewer
Goats and the
coyotes.
pigs, those pigs.
Exactly, or it could be,
Burros.
you know, any plant species.
Coyotes too?
No, they're in the next section.
Would it be?
You know, because that's
pertinent to put in
halogen.
non-native as well to?
Yes, non-native. I'll add non-native nuisance species, vegetation and flora and fauna. We have a whole section on non-native invasive species, but halogeton, for example, is non-native, but not listed as a noxious weed in Wyoming.
Right.
So it sometimes gets a pass, even though it's detrimental to livestock if overconsumed.
Okay, so the county supports the use, monitoring and the adoption of allotment management or other grazing plans. As part of the planning, the county encourages third-party data collection for grazing plans so as long as they meet established protocols. The Wyoming Department of Agriculture should be involved in the monitoring of allotments and resolving disputes. That's per statute, I'm assuming? Okay. The county also supports the use of mediation to resolve grazing management conflicts, whether it is pursuant to the Agricultural Credit Act for grazing on National Forest System land or coordinated resource management under Public Rangeland Improvement Act. The
I could
county,
give a sidebar on every one of these, but I'll try to refrain.
okay. So the county opposes the reduction, relinquishment, or retirement of grazing AUMs in favor of conservation, wildlife, and other uses. I guess my question is, what does that mean? What are grazing AUMs? I don't know what that means.
That's animal unit months.
You better spell that out maybe, and then put AUMs and we'll put it in our glossary.
Okay,
One horse or cow per 1 month is animal unit month, or 5 sheep is 1 animal unit month.
Oh, it's established and defined as what
Uh-huh.
an AUM is?
Yeah,
Okay,
yes.
okay,
So if we add that glossary, it'll have that in it.
okay. The county expects the WGFD to participate in managing forage and grazing allotments in relation to wildlife populations to ensure rangelands continue to make progress toward or meet rangeland health standards and other vegetation objectives. The county believes that wildlife populations should not be increased, nor should new species be introduced until forage allocations have been updated and an impact analysis has been completed for the effects on other wildlife species and livestock. The county opposes reductions in forage allocations based on forage studies, drought, or other natural disasters unless shared proportionality by livestock, and other uses. Increases in forage allocation resulting from improved range conditions should be shared proportionally by wildlife, livestock, and other uses. The county believes that wildlife target levels and/or populations must not exceed the forage assigned in the resource management plan. Forage allocations and forage allocations should be revised as appropriate using recent forage data.
The problem here is the Game and Fish has the public meetings and they increase or decrease the number of antelope or elk or whatever. the BLM has designated a certain number of those AUMs. They don't call them that, but they've designated a certain amount of 4-H for wildlife on all of these lands. And if they don't coordinate, and they get out of balance, you got a problem.
Yeah, then you don't have enough feed for anybody.
Right? The county believes that the land management plans, programs, and initiatives should provide the amount of domestic livestock forage expressed in AUMs for permitted active use, as well as the wildlife forage included in that amount, be no less than the maximum number of AUMs sustainable by range conditions and grazing allotments and districts based on and on the ground and scientific analysis. The county recognizes grazing permits on federal lands are assets, which may be transferred by the permit owner. Such transactions must be processed by the land management agency promptly after proper notification. Any reduction in the size of the permit or forage allocation as a result of the transaction shall not be made without a specific scientific justification, consultation with the county, and monitoring data. When grazing permits, are revoked based on livestock operator grazing violations, the permit should be made available for continued livestock use as soon as possible. The county finds that motorized access to public rangeland is vital to the permit holders and that Land Management Agency for Planning, Management, and Development. Motorized access should be maintained as open, improved as management needs require. Valid existing rights should be maintained. The county believes that grazing and wilderness should continue and all management activities should be permitted consistent with the guidance adopted by Congress and the Wilderness Act for livestock grazing and Congress direction that the exception be construed to facilitate grazing. Grazing uses shall not be diminished or impaired in any area designated as a special management area, ACEC, or inventoried roadless conservation area.
You better spell out
It's like,
AC.
what is that?
Areas of critical environmental concern. One of the buzzwords for BLM is actually a circled area on a map which has certain restrictions to it. And we'll get to it right away here.
Like, what is that?
Yeah, there's a whole wilderness section that's in. Okay, any comments, questions on grazing before we move on to mining and mineral? No. Okay. So on to mining and mineral resources. 16.2.1, we'll start there. Looks like there's something got mixed up here.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. Okay. Sweetwater County finds that mineral resources play a major role in the county's economy. The federal land management agencies control over the majority of these minerals, so federal land management directly affects projects, jobs, and revenues. The county supports preservation of access and increased access to public lands for mining and mineral resource development in a manner that satisfies local and national needs and provides for economical and environmentally sound exploration, extraction, and reclamation practices, and is consistent with and complementary to the county's lifestyle, character, and economy. Sweetwater County believes that mining and mineral resource exploration and development are consistent with the multiple use philosophy for management of public lands. These activities constitute a temporary use of the land that will not impair its use for other purposes in the future. All mineral resource exploration development shall comply with appropriate laws and regulations. Those county.
It should be the.
Yep. I'm going to make that. The county believes that all land should be open for leasing and other access with reasonable stipulations and conditions, including mitigation, reclamation, and bonding measures where necessary that will protect the lands against unnecessary and undue degradation.
Well, that's a hard one because you say all lands, but then I guess you have to have some kind of rules that guide. That's kind of tricky, that word all, Connie.
Okay, I guess what, as
Ideally,
a
yeah.
practical matter, in Sweetwater County, the only lands that fall within this chapter are public lands. And unless they're withdrawn from mining or oil and gas leasing under the Federal Land Policy Management Act, the standard is unnecessary and undue degradation. And there are extensive rules governing mitigation, reclamation, and bonding, both at the state level and at the federal level. Now, I would be the first to tell you that I think BLM in Wyoming falls down in terms of enforcing its reclamation rules, because it only prescribes certain steps be completed. It does not come back and say, was this reclamation successful?
We saw this happen in Kimmer, the Moxa Arch. They let them
Yes.
drill in there, but they didn't do the reclamation. Then they got to the BLM point where they couldn't allow any more oil and gas leases because they've disturbed more than 5% of the surface because they
Yes.
hadn't reclaimed any of the old land. So it kind of stopped all of it and forced all of this development to be over on the Hams Fork and the Blacks Fork on private land because the federal land had been used up, the allocation.
Yeah, the allocation had been used up. And again, as I remember from working on the Moxa Arch, the agency only required the companies to throw seed on the ground, and they called it good and said, you've completed your reclamation. Whereas more effective reclamation would have required going back the next season to see if it worked. And at the time, in some of the early development in, I want to say the early 2000s, you were in drought, just throwing seed on the ground, no matter what time of year, wasn't going to work. And
Well, and how many years did we work on the Continental Divide Crescent and trying to get some kind of a reclamation plan adopted with all the state agencies and the BLM?
and there was a lot of pushback, and yet it's kind of ironic because I remember going to a WAFA convention, and the Questar representative was explaining how they did reclamation on Pinedale Anticline. And it was a matter of leaving the ground rough, seeding in north-facing slopes so it doesn't blow away, and more likely is in areas that will hold the moisture and will take root. And, I thought we came up ultimately on Creston with a decent standard that favored both a mix of non-native and native vegetation to hold the soil. This is all great for coming up with standards if the BLM doesn't go back and say in 5 years, have you completed this and was it successful? There's never been a successful standard. And maybe what we need to throw in is the county would support, the county supports verification of reclamation success.
Don't they require a bond? Aren't they required to put up a bond on this?
Well, that's
public?
an interesting question. The answer is the oil and gas industry's bonds are nationwide and minimal amount of money. Now, if you're actually mining, it's a site-specific bond that quickly runs into, $250,000 held by a bond. But if you're doing oil and gas, I could post the bond and keep it going. It's a minimal amount of money, and it's not tied to the reclamation costs.
Is there any way to tie it to the reclamation cost? I mean, for the county, because I have to put up a bond when we disturb anything.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the point. It's shocking that they get away with it. The short answer is no, because of the whole federal supremacy rule. But why don't we throw in something that says, the county will require bonds when appropriate. I mean, does the county, some counties issue permits or require the company to come to the county for operations, even for oil and gas, if they're, basically making extensive use of the county roads, for example, or if they need additional bridges. And it would be perfectly reasonable for the county to require not only a bond for that work, but for any of the associated work or affiliated work for which that access was needed. Just throwing out ideas here.
I like the idea of holding their feet to the fire, anybody's feet to the fire, and mine included. If you're disturbing the land, they want it back to what it was. I mean, that's part of the allure of Wyoming to begin with.
Well, and again, it's something that I have I've always had a lot of trouble with. If you have a company that is vested in the field and is governed and is basically handling the whole field, they have a greater incentive to make it look as if it were in compliance. For example, as I said, Questar was actively promoting its reclamation program because it was their portion of Pinedale Anticline, and they had an active drilling program going. But in Moxa Arch, they had so many different operators. And it was a mix of private and federal land that it was really easy just to let stuff fall off the cliff.
Well, the companies went broke and they couldn't hold their feet to the fire.
Well, that too. But again, the bond should be high enough, and the federal government needs to increase its drilling bonds. Bottom line, those bonds should be comparable to what's applies to the mining industry. Because, I've had clients that were actively exploring, but all they were doing was exploring BLM land, in some very small drill sites. And even that, their bonds were, $250,000. They had 1,000 claims, but they still were only actually drilling on maybe 10 claims a year. And their bonds were high.
Well, and even under reclamation, Connie, I mean, it should be compatible with the area. Like Pinedale, they fenced it off and put alfalfa around a location. Well, that's ridiculous. All the antelope came in there, and that's not reclamation when you plant alfalfa. And they did that on a bunch of the sites. And it's got to be reasonable,
Yeah.
Okay, I will add a paragraph that
Something
addresses
about
this issue.
reclamation. Yeah, it has to be. And here's the other dilemma. You can get some non-native species to grow really well, like crested wheat or something like that. But the BLM in Wyoming is adamant. They won't budge off it. It has to be native, 100% native all the time. You can't put any cover crop or anything.
And
So
native vegetation will not take hold easily. And it often has to be reseeded and or replanted. And they have, new techniques now. They sort of
we can't tell them that they should be able to plant it because the feds won't let them do it. But
right.
So under reclamation, that experimental or new methods should be pursued with non-native species or something like that. We should encourage them to try to make it more flexible.
Well, we use the phrase sterile non-native species because that would hold the soil and retain the moisture until such time as the natives can take hold.
But it wouldn't duplicate itself like a weed.
Exactly. It wouldn't be like your typical crested wheat, which, again, I despise, but that's because I represent people in the Dakotas, and crested wheat scores 0 in terms of any range health assessment, even though it holds the soil, persists no matter what. But BLM put a lot of crested wheat out in Idaho and Nevada, and it's still there.
Well, do a paragraph on reclamation and some of those ideas.
I'll do that.
maybe.
Didn't mean to beat a dead horse, but it's an
No,
important.
No, I know you're
concept.
trying to keep it simple and streamlined, but some of these might be enhanced a little
Because
bit.
the county doesn't have reclamation requirements for oil and gas. Now,
Maybe
like
you ought to. That's another thing you guys can address.
Yeah, it's interesting because on renewables, like a wind or a solar, there's reclamation requirements, like industrial siting requires, if it's on public land, a bond. And so, but in some other instances, it's not required. So, you know what I mean? So that, I know we do road use agreements and things like that. So when they're tearing up a county road, we can do that from the county level, but that's it. Now, you're talking the site itself and then when it, yeah,
Yes,
right.
Because I have worked in that Kimmer area, so I know right where you're talking about. And it,
Yeah.
so, and if these companies are coming in, the smaller companies, make them put up a bond that, that's until they don't get their bond released until, and that money's in escrow or whatever the case may be. I mean, whatever we can do. If they do go bankrupt, we can still have it at least
And that's
partially
what-
taken care of.
and that's what Wyoming DEQ does for coal mining, for example. They tie up tens of millions. If the company goes bankrupt, then, there are issues,
Yeah.
but there's at least something tied up.
Okay.
Something for you to think about. So you have a new project to think about.
That's your docket, Eric.
There we go. Right.
Yeah, he's like, stop.
I don't
Uh,
know about the word all though, Connie. I think that's going to cause
Okay.
some heartburn. I don't know how you say that.
I'll just say the public lands and leave it at that, because that's
Yeah.
accurate.
Yeah,
Yep.
Fair enough.
because you have the refuge and you have the recreation area. See, they won't let any drilling or,
Now the NRA is closed to mining,
right. So the refuge is close to even a power line.
and refuges are closed by regulation to mining and oil and gas, and they have to be expressly opened. But I'll just say public land and then we'll be home free.
Yeah, because I think if you say all land, they're going to think it's everybody's land. and
Yeah, no, it will be
cause-
confusing.
It'll cause red flags. I don't want to have to go to court over this.
Well, we don't want to have to argue, have someone have a big headline, oh, the county supports
All
mining in
land.
the refuge. Yeah,
Oh, right.
Don't worry, I've been through 5 of these plans. I've had practice on some of these words. I'm still not the expert, Connie, but I'm learning.
Okay. So the county believes that federal agencies should review and revoke lease restrictions for public land leases that are no longer necessary or effective. Sweetwater County opposes any moratorium on issuing qualified mining patent applications and any barriers that may exist against developing unpatented mining claims and filing for new claims. Sweetwater County objects to indefinite withdrawals of land from mineral exploration and development. And if withdrawals are determined to be necessary, then the withdrawals should be limited to the smallest area and shortest duration. BLM's use of indefinite withdrawals, which predated enactment of FLIPMA,
You better spell that one out too.
Federal Land Policy Management Act, must be reviewed for need and renewed. Yes, we do need that spelled out.
And put it in the glossary. I know it is. in the
Yeah.
Glossary.
Must be reviewed for need and renewed under FLIPMA withdrawal procedures. The county supports the development of mining and mineral resources that minimize adverse impacts to water quality in accordance with local, state, and federal standards. And Sweetwater County believes the federal agencies need to timely process all mining permits and applications. Noxious weeds. So Sweetwater County finds that the invasion of non-native plant species not only produces various ecological modifications, but also results in substantial socioeconomic impacts, particularly to livestock industry and land management agencies responsible for fire suppression. Invasive plant species can cause more economic loss on rangeland than all other pests combined. Invasive plants reduce the carrying capacity for livestock by lowering the forage yield and displace native plants to the detriment of wildlife habitat. Consequently, the costs of managing and producing livestock increase. And then there's a quote of Utah State University. Is that a specific study, Connie? that
yes,
Utah
it
State-
was. I should look for a University of Wyoming study. But no, they're pernicious. And there were some federal,
Tex Taylor, he did some stuff on economics in Fremont County.
Okay,
From the university.
Okay. Sweetwater County supports the reduction or elimination of noxious weeds or invasive plant infestations and minimization of the establishment of new weed species using adaptive management and integrated weed management approaches. And then the county urges the federal agencies to work cooperatively with other agencies and entities to reduce or eliminate noxious weed species and minimize or prevent the establishment of new infestations and new weed species. Okay, that's it for noxious weeds. Any comment? Nothing? Okay. On to predator control. Sweetwater County supports predator control on federal lands to limited
to limit.
ravens. Oh,
What?
should say to limit. There we go. That makes more sense. To limit ravens and raptors, foxes and coyotes predation on greater sage grouse chicks in the county.
Did you put wolves in there also?
Okay, I'll add wolves.
Yeah, it's a good one.
They're about to get turned loose again, so.
Oh, I see them around here every once in a while.
Aren't some raptors protected? I mean,
Yeah, the Migratory Bird Act.
Yeah.
You got to get a permit and everything.
Yeah.
Ravens fall into that too.
Yep.
But I thought there were some specific predator control actions taken in northern Sweetwater County. Oh, I want to say 5 years ago.
I
The
think
Game
there
and
is
Fish
something,
got
yeah.
yeah, that was on
approval.
Ravens, I believe.
It was on ravens, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
it was on
Okay.
ravens.
But it's all tied to the Fish and Wildlife Service and that Migratory Bird Act. You know, we have to we can't even get the ravens out of the sheep without getting a permit from the feds.
And it's only, certain- I
Okay.
remember it's only certain times a year. It's really, with
Yeah.
ravens, it's really tricky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and the vultures, I mean, we had them in town
Oh,
behind the
yeah.
post office, like 30 of them in the trees, couldn't get rid of them.
Yeah.
And they're protected.
Well, the service has routinely allowed it for crops for decades.
Well, you still have to go through Fish and Wildlife. Service,
Yeah.
But I guess it's
Yeah.
okay to say that we want them controlled or
Well, we can still support it. We just realize that we have to get Fish and Wildlife Service approval.
Yeah.
oh yeah, and you
Yes.
gotta
Oh,
wait
yeah.
months to get it. Let me tell you.
Sweetwater County supports predator control to protect livestock and wildlife pursuant to the agreement delegating U.S. Department of Agriculture authority to the state of Wyoming. This agreement includes the Forest Service, and the BLM has implemented the State Animal Damage Control Board jurisdiction.
That's a key word. Maybe those should be capitalized. State or the Wyoming Animal Damage Control Board
Okay,
has jurisdiction and has funding from the legislature to help the counties deal with predators. And there is a county predator board, which Mr. De Leon and I have been,
You were on that one.
no, I've never been on it, but it's a kind of a weird board because it's been, the county commission can only appoint 4 of those 12 members. And
Oh.
they have to be licensed fishermen or hunters, and we didn't have that in our, so they redid the application saying that those 4 are appointed by the commission, but they must be sportsmen who do not own livestock and are licensed hunters or fishermen. So if you know of anybody, we need 3 appointees coming up in July for that spot. Then the predator board picks 7 of their own producers who pay a fee. Every time you sell an animal, you pay a predator board fee that goes back to your county to hire people to do predator control.
Mary, when you say license, do they have to be like an outfitter? Is that what you're talking
No,
about?
no, just be a sportsman with a fishing or hunting license.
Okay.
So when they go on the county website now, we've changed the website to say that, check the box, I have had a license or will have a hunting or fishing license. And I don't know, Mr. De Leon started digging into it and there were a bunch of rules that we really didn't realize that needed to be followed when the county made their appointments.
That might be something I'm interested in.
Yeah,
Well, yes, go to the county website and put your name in there. We need people. We don't have any names in there right
they
now.
meet here too, I believe. They meet here once a month, I think.
The predator board, no,
Yeah.
that's weed and pest. Predator board only meets once or twice a year in Farson.
Ah,
Weed and
Okay.
pest is another mill levy board. They have county appoints their board members.
Okay. Mark, this will be your favorite section, recreation.
Right here.
All right, here we go. Okay, on to recreation and tourism. Sweetwater County supports outdoor recreation on federal land as part of a balanced plan of economic growth and quality of life, and consistent with recreation as one of the primary multiple uses on public lands. Whoops.
When she uses that word primary uses, do you want to talk about multiple use and the primary uses, Connie? Because that threw me
Sure.
for a loop. At first.
This
when
is
you
one
said
of my
livestock-
favorite,
Yeah.
this is
It's
one of my
101.
favorite hobby horses. Public lands, when Congress adopted the Federal Land Management Act back in 1976, there was a big debate within Congress as to whether public lands in particular should be segregated into primary uses. So you'd have so much just for minerals, so much just for grazing, so much just for recreation. And the ultimate consensus was, no, let's stick with multiple use. It's something we're used to, we've always managed. But Congress threw in a little curveball and stated that of all the multiple uses, we're going to identify 6 primary multiple uses for public lands. And that's minerals, recreation, wildlife, rights of way, and livestock grazing. And people forget that, and they keep relying on multiple uses being somehow the key criteria, which is, from my perspective, missing the opportunity to stress that the public lands were intended for these primary multiple uses, which, yes, they're multiple uses, but they should be thought of first, instead of saying, well, scenery is a multiple use, wilderness is a multiple use. And yes, they're among the uses authorized for federal land, but they're not primary. And again, the public lands, as opposed to the national forests, the parks, the refuges, were set aside. The public lands were left to be sort of the money-making segment of the federal lands. And that's what they do. They make money. That's where you get all your mineral royalty funds and other uses. So that's why I stress that whenever I can. And recreation is one of those primary multiple uses. So I thought it'd be good to kind of throw that into.
Would it warrant a footnote of what primary is defined as and to put those in there?
You know, I'll throw that into the introduction section. Because it is important.
Sweetwater County believes that federal land management agencies should achieve and maintain traditional access to outdoor recreational opportunities available on federal lands as follows: hunting, trapping, fishing, hiking, camping, rock hounding, OHV travel, biking, geological exploring, pioneering, recreational vehicle camping, and sightseeing are activities that are important to the traditions, customs, and character of the county and should be allowed to continue.
Anything missing?
Should we include sandboarding, Mr. Lyon?
Yeah, we're gonna find out.
Okay. Okay. Wildlife hunting, trapping, and fishing should continue at levels determined by the Wyoming Game Fish Department and the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission. Traditional levels of group camping, group day use, and other traditional forms of outdoor recreation, both motorized and non-motorized, should be allowed to continue.
Well, what about when the Rainbow family wants to come?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's governed by permit.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what can I say?
Okay.
Wasn't that generally on the national forest as opposed to public lands?
Yeah, they
Or
will-
did they
they
like
usually-
Flaming Gorge?
They like Forest Service land.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big Sandy was the last time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they had some mutton barbecues and stuff, you know.
There should be a reclamation bond on that, by
Didn't
the way.
attend though. I just want to know, I didn't attend the barbecues in the nudist colony.
The broad spectrum of outdoor recreational activities available on federal land should be available to citizens for whom a primitive Non-motorized outdoor experience is not preferred, affordable, or physically achievable. The county supports existing levels of motorized public access traditional outdoor recreational designations in the county must be continued, including both snow machine and OHV use. The county supports OHV loops to connect communities within the region, Open area riding as well as looped and stacked trail systems should be offered with a variety of levels of trail difficulty. Sweetwater County supports active management of conflicting recreational uses so that multiple users, motorized and non-motorized user groups, are accommodated to the greatest extent practicable on federal lands. The county believes that BLM or U.S. Forest Service must coordinate and consult closely with the county on any proposals for special recreation designations, special recreation management areas, wildernesses, etc., that may affect current and future recreation use.
Should state parks be included in that with the potential we have?
I think so.
We can add it.
Okay. The county supports recreation, tourism, and associated businesses in the county, including the broad range of activities from off-road vehicle use to primitive outdoor recreation on federal lands. Okay. That's it for recreation. On the wetland,
We should probably reach out, like if you know people with the different clubs, the snowmobile clubs and the snow pokes and different groups, have them read this, see if there's anything, I'll reach out to someone, but if you guys know any of them, once we get this thing posted, or if you want to give them a copy.
Yeah, Libby be the one.
what's his name?
Yeah, Pete Leiby,
Leiby,
yeah. Yeah.
That's with snowmobile, isn't it?
Yeah, he's got the snow pokes, but then they're doing a little UTV group now. They're working
Okay.
on, so.
Well,
He's
actually,
involved.
I'm going to Rock Springs today. I'm taking the one page to the sheriff. I could take him this page and drop it off and have him ask him to comment or give it to his groups. It'll be posted on our website once we go public with it, but.
Yeah.
Janessa? Or
Yeah.
travel and tourism? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good one.
And the outdoor collaborative too. We could send a copy to.
Do you want to hand it to those and I'll get it to Pete Leiby?
Okay.
We'll still have time to do that, but it's good to get a little upfront
Yeah.
input from them.
And I can even send it over to NASA as well. so.
Oh, cool. Awesome. So, okay, so we're on to riparian and wetlands. The county supports the maintenance and improvement of riparian areas and wetlands found on federal lands for the benefit of watershed, water quality, flood control, and wildlife habitat. The county opposes the broad definition of wetlands that would encompass regulation of land on theory that it might once have been wetlands, or that it is therefore, or that there is potential, or that there are indirect connections to interstate waters. Federal regulation is limited to interstate waters, and isolated seeps or water holes should not be confused with wetlands.
But don't tell the current administration that, because they're trying to change that rule back. Do you want to talk about that, Connie?
Yeah, I wrote this section to be sort of a living statement of policy rather than going after particular regulatory proposals. But the Biden administration renewed the efforts of the Obama administration to expand wetlands to what they call geological or underground water connections. And the idea would be that, in theory, a riparian area or a water seep could be connected to an underground water system, not necessarily just an aquifer, and that connection would be flowing in interstate commerce, even though the particular seep was clearly a
mud hole,
manifestation
a
of
mud hole
water
in your
only in,
field, yeah.
yeah, only in the state and completely disconnected from anything. And we get a lot of different examples, but certainly in Sweetwater County, you have a lot of very small springs that will release water in the spring or early summer, and then they're dry. Well, under EPA's theory, there is an underground connection that may in fact flow in interstate. So that theory is enough to justify regulating as if it were a free-flowing river.
Well, the BLM has already done that because they put in wells for livestock and wildlife, and then it creates a wetland. Now it's a permanent wetland and you can't do anything near it or on it or.
Well, and that's a huge problem for operators that have expanded their water development and they've created areas that have flowing springs. For example, you know you have water potential in one site and you pump it to another and have a water hole or a reservoir.
But you
Under
can't go backwards
the-
on it once you
Under
do
the
it.
EPA definition, because that original spring theoretically is part of an underground water system, it became a wetlands, even though there was no intent to create a wetlands and you're trying to water cattle and incidentally wildlife. It's really agency overreach, and it's going to be litigated for years. You know, the Obama administration regulation was enjoined. The Trump administration regulation correcting the Obama administration was enjoined. Now we have yet another rulemaking set and another effort to go after it. So, you know, states are lined up, getting ready to file their lawsuits, and this area will be unsettled for a long time. But the Supreme Court has been pretty clear that unless there is flowing water in interstate commerce, it's not a wetlands to be regulated by EPA.
But Connie, talk a second about the importance of having a county plan now when all this stuff comes down.
Well, I think if we have it, the policy stated, you just work from that. And I will
Well, if we
add
wanted to
these.
intervene in a lawsuit, we could say our plan
It
says.
says that.
Well, I don't know that you'll be in a lawsuit, but you will have expressed your policy, and that will give you the standing to say, this is what is our policy and this is why we reached it. And that's relevant for dealing with BLM and Forest Service. You know,
Is
you're
that
not
not
going to
gonna stay
change
place
EPA.
No.
Oh, shoot, I thought you could do that, Connie.
That is an important one. We had a situation, this wasn't on public land, it was actually on private. And we required a fire protection pond. And they were trying to claim that was
Yeah.
a wetland.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
Cattails growing in it.
it was just crazy because it was.
And
really only
wetlands
for-
regulation does cover private land.
Yeah. see
So
there.
it's really important for the county to have, you know, a clearly articulated policy. And that was what I was trying to do while keeping it accessible and simple
So-
enough that everyone
Underground
understood
tanks
that.
are good.
Yes.
Underground tanks are good, Casey.
But, you know, I have
Ponds
to
are
tell
not
you,
good.
wetlands regulation is not simple. I had a dairy farmer that was threatened with litigation by EPA because he pulled out a tree stump. And it was in Oregon, so, you know, the water table was fairly high and it filled up with water. So they said, oh, you needed a dredge and fill permit for this. You destroyed a wetlands.
Oh, my word.
Oh my gosh.
Now,
Do
you know,
guys
he
understand
worked
that
it out,
sentence? Is it okay?
Yeah.
but that was also 1991, when you could work out something like that.
That's when they're worried about the spotted owls.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yep.
different time.
Different time. Okay, so 20.2.3, Sweetwater County supports conservation and management of riparian areas through application of best management practices. And see Wyoming Non-Point Source Management Plan Update 2013, Livestock Wildlife Best Management Practice Manual Update 2013. The county supports the eradication of non-native and invasive species. Was that phragmites, tamarisk, and Russian olive, which can degrade habitat value, and reduce groundwater levels. Sweetwater County supports water range improvements on federal lands to reduce pressure in riparian area and provide, I just lost my place.
Maybe you should say upland water for livestock and wildlife.
Okay,
Sweetwater County supports water range improvements on federal lands to reduce pressure in riparian areas and provide water for livestock and wildlife.
Provide upland water to get them off the creek bank.
Okay,
Upland water
gotcha,
and
okay.
for livestock and wildlife.
The county supports data-driven application of rangeland health standards for riparian areas and incorporation of information, Quality Act data when proposing riparian area management on federal lands, track proposed changes and provide comments regarding federal regulations that affect wetland jurisdiction and permitting to avoid overreach by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Sweetwater County opposes federal agency efforts to expand wetland jurisdiction and impose additional permitting requirements by EPA and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
I have just one question. This might sound like a silly question or an asinine question, but is there any way that we could word somehow to keep people like Million to try to drain out of Seatskity, discourage?
Use that for her shower.
Yeah.
I think we covered that in water, which isn't too far away.
Transbasin
Transmission
diversions.
diversion.
Okay, all right,
Transbasin diversions and taking water out of Wyoming.
Okay,
Yeah, I remembered billion.
yeah.
We'll try to read that again, make sure that you think it's covered.
Well, no, since
Yeah.
it was wetlands, I don't know why, I just thought of that just now. Just a silly question, so.
No, it's not a
silly.
silly question. It's an
No.
important issue.
Very important.
Commissioner Wendling is on Zoom. I just want to let you guys know. Thanks, Doc, for joining.
Okay, thumbs up, there we go.
Might make it easier when we have to go to the commission and try to explain all this that you people have spent 6 hours on. I don't know how we're gonna do that one, Eric.
Well, this is typically what we do. I mean, that's the plan. That's why we go through this in great detail in the Planning and Zoning Commission. What I'd like to do is when we're done with this, send this out to the Board of County Commissioners to read, and then go section by section when we get to the Board of County Commissioners. And if they have any comments or concerns, generally that's what we do with language amendments. We hammer it out at the Planning and Zoning Commission. We get to the commissioners, we put it on them well, you've read through this, Doc's has been through these meetings too. We put it on them to go through it, and if they have any questions. So that's what
Thank
I
you.
think.
But so
Otherwise,
thank
it'll
you for
turn
being
into
our sounding board.
yes,
This is a perfect board to do it though, because you deal with the land issues.
yes. And then the other thing is by doing these workshops and putting them out on YouTube for the public to see, they can go back and see exactly what is in the document too. It's out there. Okay, on to wilderness, another important section. So we're on 8:30. 2.2.2, because wilderness management prohibits motorized travel, logging, mining, or drilling, and virtually all use of mechanical equipment, Sweetwater County believes any wilderness designation should consider foregone mineral and energy development potential, logging and forest products, impacts to grazing management, private and state land in holdings, opportunity for land transfers, motorized recreational uses, water management, vegetation management, and recreation.
I think you need to add the mechanized, it includes a bicycle. A lot
No,
of people think that you can ride a bicycle into the wilderness. You cannot. It's mechanized.
Bearing. You can't have it like hang gliders. You can't have hang gliders in wilderness area. You can't have anything that's
Mechanized.
mechanized, basically. Yep.
No
Okay, I'll add.
chainsaws.
Yep. Yeah, no chainsaws, nothing.
No,
Yeah, yeah.
better pull your axe and your saw out, right? Sweetwater County opposes the White House and Interior Department 30 by 30 initiative to ensure each state meets a 30% conservation objective. Wyoming already exceeds that commitment with existing wilderness areas and national parks. Sweetwater County also meets this objective through the Flaming Gorge National Recreation Area, the 13 WSA's wilderness study areas,
You better spell that out, Connie.
and
Yeah.
Siskiyou National Wildlife Refuge, other withdrawals and public land orders limit development. I don't know, Commissioner Tolman, if you want to explain, or Connie, the 30 by 30 initiative.
Go ahead, Connie. We passed a resolution last year in the commission, and I think you need to make reference to it in the appendix. We adopted
Okay.
it last April.
Okay, yes,
we
I will
oppose the,
add that.
The lack of sales for oil and gas, and we oppose the 30 by 30, which means by 2030, they want to have 30% of the land in America. What do they want it withdrawn, or what do they want it? What's the 30?
Well, that's a little unclear. They call it a conservation initiative,
But
but
they
they
won't
are
define it.
very ambiguous about what they define as conservation. And, my first reaction was 30 by 30 was nothing more than, a very ignorant executive order that didn't take into account the extensive wilderness, parks and wildlife refuges and national monuments already in existence. I think what Interior Department sees the 30 by 30 is 30% more land in conservation. And that would be the only thing that makes any sense. And I think as we see, I haven't seen any actual implementation, but I think in the next year, we will see additional areas being added on the basis that they need more land in conservation, not taking into account existing land. And, it was really based on ignorance, but it said, we need so much in conservation, not taking into account that each of the Western states far exceeds that 30 by 30 now.
Maybe you should underline that existing word.
Yeah,
Doesn't Sweetwater County, isn't part of the sand dunes out there, isn't that wilderness part of that? I don't know.
It's a wilderness study area.
Okay.
Which
Okay.
we have 13 of
technically
them.
Sweetwater County doesn't have any actual designated wilderness.
Well, Adobe Town, don't we have one? Piece of Adobe Town is actual.
Okay, when did that happen?
I think it is.
Because that's BLM, and I thought Wyoming didn't have any public land wilderness.
Okay, well, I could be wrong. I don't know. I thought a piece of Adobe Town really was a wilderness.
I don't know.
I think it was recommended for wilderness.
So it's just a wilderness study area. They just wanted expansion on it.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Okay.
And there are lots of other sort of
13 wilderness
Adobe
study
Town
areas.
this, Adobe Town that, but Adobe Town still remains a proposed wilderness study area. And Congress has never acted on wilderness, and so if we go into Lincoln County, for example, there's already some existing wilderness, or Sublette County, by virtue of the Bridger-Teton National Forest. But Flaming Gorge doesn't have designated wilderness yet. And as a result, Sweetwater County has been, I want to say, spared that knife for a while. But that doesn't mean it won't happen.
But the big point I think that needs to be made is that a bunch of those, I think 10 of those 13 did not even qualify as a wilderness study area by their own criteria. I don't know, maybe it's in the next sentence or two here, Connie, but I think that's where we hold our feet to the fire. You can't make it a wilderness if it doesn't even qualify.
Yes, I will
By
be
their
sure
own
to
rules.
make that additional point.
But do we have any pushback to the federal government though? That's just it. I mean, we sit in here living in Wyoming. We agree with this, the wilderness study areas. There are some areas that you could justified, but a lot of these aren't. And what kind of pushback can we have?
Well, talk
Well,
about
the-
the RMP, Connie. The only pushback we have is protesting the resource management plan that's about to come out with all these new use areas.
The plan is important, but the best protection that Wyoming has enjoyed is a combination of the delegation never supporting additional wilderness in Wyoming, certainly for Sweetwater County, not supporting designation of the public land wilderness areas because they haven't proposed a bill since 1992 when these went to Congress. And three, there's a tradition in Congress that if the members of the state delegation on the House and the Senate, and yes, Wyoming only has 3 members. If the state's representatives do not support wilderness, that bill does not go forward. Now we've seen that fail in Alaska and more recently in Utah. But even then, the state delegation's opposition has pretty much held those bills at bay. They don't go anywhere.
We've seen some happen here, in the 80s and late 80s, up in the Bridger Teton National Forest, where they designated some more area up there, wilderness area. And I know I've never heard of anybody in Wyoming actually agree with any of this, but they've actually increased the wilderness areas in those Sublette County. Exactly. Yep. Mary knows, yeah.
I used to drive all over that.
Yep.
Mhm.
So I just worry about that.
That would have been the 1984 Wilderness Act, and I bet that was part of the deal that Wyoming got hard release. Because Wyoming and Arizona were like the only two, Wyoming, Utah, and Arizona were the only 3 Western states during that flurry of wilderness bills that got what we call hard release, which means the law states the agency would never go back and expand the areas considered potential for wilderness, and that these lands had to be returned to multiple use. Now, Forest Service has completely ignored that direction, but that was hard release, and I was not active in the Wyoming Wilderness Act debate, but I'm willing to bet that was part of the deal. Just throwing a guess out because I know what happened in Arizona, and there
Connie,
were yes.
I sent you that that resolution, that 3030
I
resolution.
saw that. Thank you, John. It just came through on my email.
Okay, so the county does not support designation of additional areas within the county as federally designated wilderness. The county does not support management of any additional federal lands within the county as non-WSA lands with wilderness characteristics, natural areas, inventoried wilderness areas, or similarly intention management regimens. The county supports removal of management provisions from federal lands that promote their management for wilderness characteristics and roadless qualities over other uses consistent with the multiple use and sustained yield management standard. The county's support for any wilderness designations is conditioned upon the following: the state and county road systems and resolutions within the Federal Land Management Agency planning area, National Forest or BLM land are fully and
Or
complete.
BOR.
Okay,
Okay. Are fully and completely incorporated into the plan provisions. State or land roads and right-of-ways are recognized and not impaired in any way by the recommendations. The possibility of future land development of mineral resources by underground mining or oil and gas extraction, by directional or horizontal drilling or other non-surface disturbing methods are not affected by the recommendations. The need for additional administrative or public roads necessary for the full utility of the various multiple uses, including recreation, mineral exploration and development, forest health activities, operation and maintenance of water facilities, and grazing operations on adjacent land or on subject lands for grandfathered uses are not impaired by the recommendations. The analysis compares the full benefit of multiple use management to the recreation, forest health, and economic needs of the state and the county to the benefits of the requirements of wilderness management. And I think this next one goes to the point of that 1992. So Sweetwater County believes that public lands that were determined to lack wilderness character during previous wilderness review completed in 1992 cannot be managed as if they were wilderness based on new or revised views of wilderness character.
But they do manage them, those wilderness study areas, they do manage them like they're wilderness.
Yeah,
Well, wilderness study areas were by law have to be managed not to impair their wilderness character. And, you know, because BLM fudged on the definition of what was a road. And if you couldn't affirmatively prove that there was a D9 cat on the road, they wouldn't define it as a road. And a lot of roads, Wyoming, Utah, Northern Colorado, are 2 tracks, but they're important roads that are very necessary and are used with motorized vehicles. But when BLM changed that definition, they included a lot of lands as potentially wilderness. Now they threw out a lot of those lands in the final study based on mineral potential and other factors. But you kind of got hosed on that one. But aside from that, they shouldn't be reaching into other areas in the county and saying, well, we believe today this qualifies as wilderness, even though they're actively maintained roads. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of the pressure for lands with wilderness character. And that's what we saw in the Rock Springs Field Office's supplemental list of lands with wilderness character. Now, I don't know where the field office is on that list. They got them from the Wilderness Society. The field manager was going to incorporate it in the plan. President Trump was elected. They disappeared. I don't know if we're going to see those back again. But that's what that policy was directed
It's a
towards.
BLM
is-
buzzword, wilderness character.
Yep.
Yes.
You better put it in a glossary, maybe italicize it or something. Some of these buzzwords that are BLM buzzwords.
Well, I may just pull the definition that they used. Because the
Yeah.
important thing about the new definition of lands with wilderness character was that they took out the roadless character. They took out, so it's just, if it exhibits any opportunity for solitude, it could be a land with wilderness character. If it's outstanding, and this is where Adobe Town gets its followers. If it has outstanding scenery, then all of a sudden it should be a land with wilderness character, when it's really nothing more than a scenic area that should be managed within the authority to protect visual resources without suddenly slapping a wilderness label on it.
Okay.
But I'll see if I can't do a better job of defining.
All right.
Excellent. County would only support any proposed wilderness designations in the county forwarded to U.S. Congress for consideration if there is a collaborative process in which support for the wilderness designation is unanimous among federal, state, and local officials.
And meets the proper criteria or whatever the word is, Connie.
Okay, yeah. Statutory definition of wilderness.
Okay. Sweetwater County believes that wilderness management must provide for continued and reasonable access to and development of valid existing rights within the area and provide for full use and enjoyment of these rights. Sweetwater County opposes BLM inventories for the presence of wilderness characteristics unless closely with state and local governments, and they should reflect a consensus among those governmental agencies about the existence of wilderness characteristics as follows. BLM should, pursuant to its authority to inventory, identify and list all roads or routes identified as part of a local or state governmental transportation system and consider those routes or roads as disqualifying the area as roadless. BLM should adjust the boundaries to exclude areas that do not meet the criteria of lacking roads, offering solitude, and offering primitive and unconfined recreation, and the boundaries should be redrawn to reflect an area that clearly meets the criteria above and which does not employ minor adjustments to simply exclude small areas with human intrusions. Specifically, the boundaries of a proposed geographic area containing lands with wilderness characteristics should not be drawn around roads, right-of-ways, and intrusions, and lands located between individual human impacts that do not meet the requirements for lands with wilderness characteristics should be excluded.
Okay, the Conservation District with county funding did a really extensive study of every road that's in the county, trail, all of it, and it's in a database that the county has now. And the reason we did it is when they start doing the travel management plan or the road plan for that Rock Springs RMP, we can define which roads that, you know, we think are important that stay on the maps. Because as Kent Felderman was developing this database, he was searching all of these different search engines to find all the existing roads. Well, the most comprehensive one was on the Wyoming BLM website. And after he pulled it off of there, guess what? It was a different thing on there. It was very comprehensive. It had all the roads in the county are on that. It's in that database, that BLM map, but it's not on the BLM website anymore.
Oh, wow.
So FYI.
Well, do you want me to incorporate that study in this plan? It was kind of a
Yeah.
hot button a couple of years ago, so I purposely did not include it.
Yeah, I don't, yeah, how do we reference it though? Megan's over there because she has that database.
Well, we can include it
She's
as
the
a,
keeper of the holder of the database.
you know, at one point it was submitted only to BLM and it was under privilege. But it was a public document and the county can decide to make it public. And if BLM put it on the website, however briefly, they basically wiped out any privilege.
That map.
I don't know. Let's think about it.
Well, yeah, I don't think we have to
Put
put
it
it
on there,
here.
then they have something to reference. Well, this one isn't on that map.
Yeah,
You know
I
what
know.
I mean?
It's
So,
major. It's.
yeah. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you
Yeah.
don't.
Well, we still have it in our comments to the BLM on their travel plans and stuff. So I mean, it's documented in numerous letters and will be as they move into that travel management plan.
Yep.
So don't throw that thing away yet. Megan, it scares you because it's got every layer of everything, all the
Andy,
mineral
are you,
potential and wildlife areas and everything.
doing like putting in artificial turf?
What was that?
What was
Doc?
that, Doc? Not sure you meant.
Well, that's fine. I'm willing to wait, but I'm wondering if you're still interested in doing this project over here at 2211 Sierra Road.
I think he's talking about his house.
2211, yeah, 22.
Thank you.
You
I'm
wanna
pretty sure he doesn't
become-
want that on YouTube.
Do you want to become a wilderness area? Is that what you're asking for?
Oh, okay.
So we get artificial turf now.
Yeah. We do. Where are we going with the artificial
Oh,
turf? And
we don't have a
wilderness
section
areas?
on that.
Oh, that was good.
It's not natural. We should outlaw it.
Right?
Doc, you're in trouble.
Okay, so we're on to wild and scenic rivers and 2.3.2.1. The county recognized the effects of wild and scenic river designation are difficult to quantify unless the owners of the water rights are identified. The amount of water is quantified and there is a disclosure of the rights and structures that will be limited in the future. For instance, a rancher may own a water right on the stream but not use any structures for diversion because the livestock drink directly from the stream. After designation, the rancher would not be allowed to build diversion structures. The county also recognized that any river segment designated would be closed to mineral development and other land uses would be burned or prohibited. Sweetwater County objects to designating rivers as wild or scenic unless the state engineer certifies that there are no existing water rights are held on the stream segment and no upstream water rights holder will be limited in its use of water and no owner of water rights comes forward to
I
object.
have a question to ask Connie. Since the refuge takes up 29 miles of the Green River, how would that How would that affect the wild and scenic designation?
It probably wouldn't, because the refuge would have a limited reserved water right to keep water in the stream necessary for the purposes of the wildlife refuge. If they're diverting water for a refuge center or for a wildlife refuge interpretive center where you have toilets and a bathroom, they'd have to apply to the state for basically a municipal water right. That wouldn't be a reserved water right. But by keeping water in the stream, it's completely consistent with downstream wild and scenic river designation.
Well, and they do use water rights to fill ponds.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
but they should be going to the state and getting a permit for that. I don't
Yeah,
know that they do. I think
Well, they have
sometimes,
existing water rights that somehow came to the refuge. I don't know how that
Okay.
worked.
well, they may have acquired the land with the water right.
Right, that's what they did. Yeah,
Okay, I've seen that with Browns Park too.
yeah, okay.
Okay, and so they're just, as a subsequent owner of the water right, they're exercising their water rights. But
Okay.
if the refuge wanted to expand that existing water right or change the point of diversion that would change the flows, then a designation downstream might interfere with that. You know, we don't see a lot of it because there hasn't been enough Wild and Scenic River Act designations in the western states
Oh, there
that
was
don't have a
big-
lot of water.
Well, in Teton County, there was on the Snake River, big
Yes,
flap about that.
yes. But, you know, the big designations were in Oregon and Washington where there's tons of water and people don't worry. Whereas in Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, there's just not enough water. So it does have an effect. But it's mainly on the actual construction of a diversion structure.
We don't have any rivers designated as wild and scenic in Sweetwater County, do we? No.
Well, we only have 3 rivers in the whole county.
But BLM had a lot of, BLM did a study, and I've forgotten what their recommendations were in Sweetwater County. Or maybe they didn't do the study. They did a 2002 study that covered Pinedale, Kemmer,
Well, I
Lander.
know the Snake River was a problem because Sublette County didn't want it, Teton County did. So you're going to draw a line in the middle of the river.
Yeah,
you know.
okay.
It's going to end right here.
I know.
I don't know if they got it. I think they got it though. Didn't they get that wild and scenic thing in Teton County? Well, I guess it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect us, but I don't know.
Well,
County
that just
opposed-
went through on a congressional deal. I think that was when your Senator Thomas was dying. And that's what he wanted.
Oh, yeah.
County opposes designation if it would adversely affect the economic interests of the county, including enjoyment of private property rights, mineral extraction, timber harvest, agriculture, water rights, water storage, or water delivery. County believes that potential reservoir sites should be excluded from designation as wild and scenic rivers. The county requires that any reserved water right created by the designation be junior to all absolute and conditional water rights existing before the special designation is finalized. And Sweetwater County recommends that unless the U.S. Congress act on recommended wild and scenic river designations within 5 years of federal agency recommendations, the river should be released. Okay, so this next area is that ACEC, so the areas of critical environmental concern. Okay, 2.4.2.
These are the things we talk about when we're in those pre-decisional cooperator meetings with the federal agency, like on the Rock Springs BLM Resource Management Plan, those years of meetings. Okay, we argue for this or that based on what we believe. Okay, so the BLM has selected 5 alternatives. The one is going to be a conservation alternative with a lot of special designations like this. Okay, then leave it as it is, the the no change alternative, or you had the resource friendly one that was going to follow the Trump energy policy, more oil and gas development. Okay, so the main thing is going to happen now when this plan comes final is just where that needle is going to land. It's probably going to land more on the conservation side with more of these special designation areas than it would have under the last administration if it would have gone through then. So they're still going through reviews. It's about to go public where the people can see it and comment on the preferred alternative that the BLM is going to select on that 5 alternative scale. So that's where these ACEs and these more restrictive areas will come more into play. They've been pointed out on the maps, and it's whether they're going to become final and accepted as an official ACEC or not.
And if I could point out that the BLM proposal that's now in draft for areas of environmental concern automatically shut down future oil and gas leasing. And so while by statute, the ACECs are not closed to mineral development of any kind, the BLM, especially in Rock Springs, plans to make these basically no-go zones for any kind of mineral development, mining or oil and gas, potash, you name it, it's a no-go.
So through that coalition of local governments of 5 counties that meet once a month to have, not Connie anymore, but Danielle Betancourt, we will be probably protesting or writing comments opposing what they select as a proposed alternative if that's the way they go, and also holding their feet to the fire as far as what is legally required and what are they trying to do above and beyond that. Is that correct, Connie?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. In the past, BLM's been kind of lazy about justifying an area of environmental concern, and so they'll just sort of grab a whole bunch of land and say, oh, this boundary looks good, when in fact there's no justification for anything other than maybe, say, 1,000 acres of a 40,000 acre site. And we're seeing that a lot in the draft.
Well, you'll see it up in the Jack Morrow Hills area and the little prospects, that golden triangle is
Yes, exactly.
seeing as an offset to the Jonah oil and gas development and NPL. Okay, this is an area that now we can protect to, and it's just how they do it legally and don't abuse the privilege of protecting.
And I guess, again, going back to why I consider ACECs kind of a lazy designation. BLM has ample authority to coordinate with Wyoming Game and Fish Department to protect big game habitat. And they've done so for more than 30 years now, or almost 30 years. And they have winter range, and they have critical lambing range and calving ranges and, reserve ranges. And those are managed with, by imposing stipulations on mineral development, closing roads. So there's no reason that that is not adequate, and there's no evidence that it isn't adequate. So why would we do an ACEC? And the answer is you can't, because an ACEC is when you have no other tool available.
Okay, so the objectives that we have for ACECs, the county opposes broad scale ACEC classifications and sports. I'm assuming that needs to
Thorough,
be
it should be thorough.
Yeah. A thorough reevaluation of current ACECs and their management with a view to limiting management to a specific resource and a specific area. The county believes that when big game and wildlife habitat is not regionally or nationally significant and can be readily managed through a habitat designation in the plan, the area should not be designated an ACEC. And the county also concludes that unless BLM can show threat of irreparable injury, an area will not qualify for ACEC designation. Okay, so on to, these are special management areas. Sweetwater County believes that special management can dilute the statutory direction that public lands be managed primarily for wildlife recreation, mineral development, grazing, and rights of way. This emphasis on particular multiple uses distinguishes public lands from the National Forest System multiple use directive. County support for special management areas will depend on objective evidence that the area needs specific management not otherwise available under the plan. And the county will oppose special management area, which are de facto wilderness area nominations. Sweetwater County supports the special management areas to accommodate the primary and multiple uses and do not result in de facto mineral withdrawals, rights of way closures, or grazing reductions. The area identified should be the smallest area necessary to achieve discrete management objectives. The next is on
Well, special management area is like a special recreation area. It might be at where the petroglyphs are out there, you know, and stuff like that. Is how big does that area have to be?
threatened, endangered, and sensitive species. Sweetwater County supports delisting species and designated critical habitats that were erroneously listed. Example, listed based on incorrect data or assumptions and/or that are no longer threatened and endangered species or sensitive based on criteria established by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Sweetwater County opposes the reintroduction of large predators that are listed as threatened or endangered unless it is an experimental reintroduction without land use restrictions and there are measures in place to manage predation. The county supports federal agencies' accurate inventory of threatened, endangered, and sensitive species across all state, federal, and tribal lands. Sweetwater County supports updating and modernizing the ESA.
You better spell out ESA, Connie.
Yeah, I've got that circled.
Such as those recommended by the Wyoming Western Governor Association to improve the delisting process and limit misuse by special interest groups to influence land use decisions by submitting numerous petitions to list groups of species as threatened or endangered. The county supports alternatives to listings under the ESA, including habitat conservation plans, management initiatives, or candidate conservation agreements to address threats to species and their habitats. The county opposes actions to list any species as threatened or endangered or designation of critical habitat under the ESA or actions to add any species to the state of Wyoming sensitive species list until verifiable scientific data have been available to the public that demonstrate the need for the designation that protections cannot be provided by other methods and that the area in question is truly unique compared to any other area lands. The county believes that recovery plans, reintroduction plans, guidelines, and protocols for species listed as threatened or endangered under the ESA should be developed with full public disclosure and in coordination with private property rights and local governments that will be affected by the recovery plan. Recovery plans must contain indicators of effectiveness and recovery progression, identifiers of recovery completion, self-determinate provisions upon successful recovery and management provisions after the plan is terminated. The county believes that recovery plans for species listed as threatened or endangered should clearly identify the parties responsible for collecting data to monitor species recovery and how the data will be collected. Funding adequate to collect the data required to monitor progress toward recovery must be included in federal agencies' budgets at the time of listing. When recovery plans are achieved, then federal agencies should proceed to delist instead of changing the definition of recovery. The county believes that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service must disclose and discuss economic harm when designating critical habitat. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service shall involve local and county government representatives in their assessment of the economic impact of critical habitat designations in accordance with NEPA. When developing recovery plans for species listed as threatened or endangered, Sweetwater County believes that it's not necessary or possible to restore a species to all habitats once occupied by the species to achieve a population that is not at risk of extinction. Recovery plans should establish objectives that restore or preserve only the amount of habitat and population size needed to protect the species from extinction. And Sweetwater County opposes designation of critical habitats for threatened and endangered species unless habitat is actually occupied and proven to be necessary.
Because their favorite thing is to say this is potential habitat, therefore you can't drill there or whatever.
The county supports reintroductions only if limited to specific physical boundaries and scope. Okay. On to water.
More water.
No,
We're getting there, guys.
oh, wow, we're almost there.
Okay. Sweetwater County supports managing federal lands and watersheds for optimal water yield. The county supports ongoing water quality monitoring to establish baseline conditions to track potential surface and groundwater contamination that could result from changes in federal land use. Example is oil and natural gas or mining. When evaluating federal land actions, Sweetwater County supports division of water quality standards and those mitigation strategies outlined for non-point and point sources. The county supports the best available water resource data, which also conforms to Information Quality Act criteria for federal land planning activities. And Sweetwater County supports protection of property rights associated with implementation of federal water development projects.
Connie, you need to somehow say somewhere in there that that we support locally led, like the Conservation District does those sampling and analysis plans, and we did the local watershed plans.
Okay, I'll add that.
Well, I don't know the right words, but
I'll look at what the district has.
locally
and-
led planning
put in-
efforts.
Yeah, planning for watershed.
So that it isn't coming from DEQ or the state. We are submitting the plans with local input.
Got it.
The county supports water development projects for livestock and wildlife outside of sensitive riparian, stream, and wetland areas. Okay, water rights. Sweetwater County supports state jurisdiction over water rights and oppose efforts to revise or reinterpret the Colorado Compact to decrease Wyoming's allocation of water. The county supports water rights held by federal entities only if they are obtained through the state water appropriation process and will not infringe upon existing water rights.
So Eric, do you want to expand that, the Colorado, the 24.2.1? Just saying oppose efforts to revise or reinterpret interstate compacts, including the Colorado River Compact,
Sure.
the Colorado River Basin Compact. So including but not limited to.
So going over state lines,
What's that?
addressing the issue of taking it over state lines, is that the interstate?
Well, no, just, I mean, those are the two, I think, biggest compacts. And so just identifying those two specifically, I think.
Yeah.
Is the point, and saying to include but not limited to. As far as the addressing the state line issue, I mean, I think that would be addressed through talking about beneficial use when it's stated. So I don't know if you want to reference the statute there or not, but which
I can add
believe
up.
which I believe is 41.3.101. So if there was a statement addressing beneficial use, or it's a statement that which essentially says that the water has to be for the land that it's taken from. So that would be the area, I guess, where you could address it.
Did you get all that, Connie?
I did.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, wild horses.
So is there any way we can get rid of all of them?
That won't be popular with some.
That would be popular with me.
You can actually go out and pet those on White Mountain.
So Sweetwater County concludes that the adverse resource impacts are measurable, especially in Sweetwater County's arid, high altitude land. In drought periods, county ranchers take voluntary non-use or cuts, but wild horse numbers continue to increase, and BLM gatherers in 2021 did not achieve the lower end of appropriate management levels. Sweetwater County finds that the Salt Wells, Divide Basin, and Adobe Town herd management areas overlap other critical wildlife and big game habitat, particularly the core sage grouse habitat areas. Wild horse use directly conflicts with these habitat designations, and BLM needs to promptly address them. The county relies on research that finds that feral wild horses adversely affect rangeland by virtue of forage cropping done by horses and territorial nature. The county recognizes that wild horse herd management areas and wild horses will also impair resources on private land, and BLM cannot manage wild horses on private land without consent.
Rock Springs Grazing Checkerboard.
Yep. Sweetwater County recognizes that the surface leasee in the Wyoming Checkerboard revoked its consent to retain wild horses on the private surface in 2010.
They just turned 60 of them back out.
Wow.
Yeah, well,
The county also finds that BLM must gather wild horses upon request of the private landowner. Competition for the scarce funding has meant that BLM does not honor the requests of the private landowners on the checkerboard and elsewhere. Sweetwater County supports revision or elimination of herd management areas to exclude greater sage grouse priority or core habitat, and revision of wild horse management numbers. The county believes that the number of wild horses to be managed should also be reduced to take into account for rangeland health standards and other big game and wildlife habitat management areas and management standards. A reduced number of wild horses will also protect rangeland resources from adverse impacts if BLM cannot promptly implement gathers. And the county recommends the BLM must commit to annual or biennial gathers to maintain appropriate management level numbers, and ensure wild horses do not leave herd management areas. The county still supports the plan for a wild horse viewing area, which the city of Rock Springs proposed.
You know, it's a shame because my father-in-law is he was the head of this district for the BLM. It's not so much the BLM's opposed to gathering them. It's the conservation groups that oppose the wild horse roundup. And that's where the bottleneck comes in, is we have these groups opposing the main range management for the wild horses. And I don't see, we can work hand in hand with the BLM on this issue, but where it comes into conflict is the people that are protesting this.
well, it was interesting. The Game and Fish in their November magazine came out, the competition between antelope and wild horse for 4-H. And the whole issue is just managing the resource properly so that we don't end up like Nevada with all these starving animals all over the
Mhm.
place.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's okay to have them, but you have to manage their numbers so that you don't destroy the resource for everything.
Is there any way we could maybe help the BLM in this instance?
Well, the new director, Tracy Stone Manning at NACO, on the web Zoom I was on in January, she said that it is a priority for her to see that the wild horses are managed properly to not adversely affect the resources. But maybe we need to even make a stronger statement in there, Connie, somehow. The goal is to prevent resource and animal damage or harm, but I don't know how you state that.
Well, I will say that, you know, the county through the Coalition of Local Governments has attempted to identify weaknesses in the BLM environmental documents that are always challenged by the conservation groups. And, you know, if BLM would have listened to the coalition in the last 3 or 4 years, they would have, you know, produced a better document. But I will add a paragraph. So aside from my little bit of criticism, we'll continue to support BLM in its efforts to prepare challenge-worthy documents for the gathers. You know, it's
Well, and they've proposed trying to do fertility control. They're trying some of it, but they get challenged on that too.
Yeah.
well, fertility control is a
Something.
difficult area because the agency has never wholeheartedly tried to implement it, didn't follow directions.
Well, they're
And-
introducing IUDs into the horses right now. That's how they're doing it.
Yes, yeah, but only a few.
Yeah. Not all of them, not even
It's always
majority.
very tentative, and that's not enough to actually slow down the growth to the point where they can continue to keep up.
As if they can
And-
get a sustainable population control so they don't have to continue to do the gathers. And I mean, I don't want to be critical, but I went out on the gathers when the helicopter was bringing them in. So the pilot, he brings in 6 bunches of 117. The next day they turn out 60 and 70.
Isn't there
I think they'd
anyone-
be better to leave intact units out there instead of gather them all and turn them back out. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, Connie, you're a lot smarter than me, but you know, they had, when they reintroduced wolves, it was always because it was a native species. They went to reintroduce them. Horses are not native. Is there any way?
No, they're
to-
not. They're
is
a
there any way to-
non-native
to-
invasive species.
Yeah. Is there any way to go about it that way?
Well,
they
no,
always-
not
they
until the
always say
law
they
is
can't-
changed. The law is
Oh.
very strict, and the law is, you know, when Congress passed the Wild Horse Act in 71, they had no idea that horses would reproduce at the level they did once they were protected. No one expected that. And that's why then they went back in, I want to say 76, 74, and amended the law to say you had to manage horses consistent with multiple use management. But even that's not been enough to actually make the program work. They need to amend the law. That's just the brutal fact. And they amended the law in the 80s to allow for the sale of wild horses. And then there's been a appropriations measure every single year prohibiting the sale of wild horses to slaughterhouses.
But Connie, how come they won't use the Spanish bloodline like the Adobe Town herd has? Why do they avoid that as the true wild horse? Why do they accept all these feral horses? And
Because of the definition of what was a wild horse when the act was passed. It was any
Okay.
horse left out there. And the
Oh.
tragedy was that
Oh,
the
okay.
industry didn't embrace and claim ownership for every horse out there. No, that was a statutory definition. And it's been a painful error. But that was 50 years ago.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right.
What we thought 50 years ago is a lot different than now. But I will add something about the county supporting gathers and gather documents so that legal challenges are not successful. Because that has delayed the matter, and I don't think BLM has gotten a single wild horse EA approved through the courts in the last.
Yeah, well, how about instead of saying, just say legally defend, we support the
Yes,
BLM
yeah,
in the preparation of
exactly.
legally defensible documents
Decision
to
documents.
properly manage for the resource and.
Got it,
And the wild horses.
There you
got it.
go.
Good language. I'll add that.
I'm not the liar.
Yeah. So we're on the last section here on wildlife. So Sweetwater County supports the maintenance of big game, including healthy populations of mule deer, elk, and antelope, while minimizing negative impacts from winter migration, including vehicle collisions and residential and commercial vegetation damage. The county supports management of this greater sage grouse and its habitat in accordance with the conservation plan for the greater sage grouse in Wyoming as implemented by the state, with the map of the core habitat areas identified in the governor's executive order.
We better put the dates on there, 2014 and 19 or whatever it was.
Yeah, because
Okay, I'll add the dates.
yep, for sure. Included in the appendix and incorporated by reference. Yep. Sweetwater County supports the conclusion of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department that livestock grazing has de minimis impacts on greater sage grouse habitat and recommend the removal of the extensive restrictions and standards that govern livestock grazing in the 2015 BLM amendments to the resource management plans.
We've sat through two huge plans that were adopted and accepted. Now this administration is wiping it off the table and say it never happened. We're starting from zero. We're going to redo all of this.
Yeah. Very deflating. The county supports mitigating the loss of or fragmentation of habitats and disturbance during sensitive periods while respecting other multiple uses and private property rights. Wyoming WGFD, federal land management agencies, and the county shall work together to manage and conserve big game populations and their habitats, identify migration corridors, and seek to remove barriers along those corridors in a manner that respects private property rights. WGFD and US FWS should continue to find effective ways to mitigate and compensate landowners for damage caused by big game animals on private property. The county does not support increases in wildlife populations or introduction of new species until forage and habitat allocations have been provided and an impact analysis that includes participation and concurrence by the county, wildlife management agencies, public land management agencies, and private landowners is completed for the effects on other wildlife species and livestock. The county believes that reduction in forage allocation resulting from forage studies, drought, or other natural disasters will be shared proportionately by wildlife, livestock, and other uses. The county supports increases in forage allocations resulting from improved range conditions if they are shared proportionately by wildlife, livestock, and other uses. The county believes that wildlife populations need to be consistent with the forage assigned in the resource management plan forage allocations. The county supports the protection of livestock, other property, private property, and habitat of wildlife species by controlling predator and wildlife numbers. The county supports the WGFD to maintain a healthy population of pronghorn in the area described above, provided that the rights of ranchers, farmers, ranchers, and mineral owners are protected. The county would define all feral horses found roaming on public lands in the county are either in trespass or violate the terms of federal land use plans and shall be removed. And Sweetwater County believes that all federal or state wildlife management agencies shall coordinate with the county before establishing regulatory measures associated with wildlife that could impact energy development.
On 2.12, wouldn't you also say pronghorn mule deer or elk?
Not at all. It's probably gonna be-
Honey?
I think you're probably right. I'll add deer and elk.
Yeah, because we have migration corridors and I don't know if we talked about that.
You know, I kind of wanted to touch that lightly because I knew that was a sensitive point. But it was the deer migration corridors that were so controversial because the original corridor took an outlier. And they had one doe that just kept traveling. And they made her the definitive migration corridor instead of relying on what most of the deer needed. And
She just passed away, by the way.
Oh, really?
so I'll add that. I thought I had a migration corridors paragraph. Let me go back. If I didn't, I'll add it.
I don't think so.
I didn't see it.
I didn't see it. Well, just something about migration corridors and private property rights. I think that's the important. part.
Yes. Well, and coordinating with the counties, because the real problem
Right.
wasn't that the counties opposed the migration corridors. It's just they never talked to the counties before they did it. And that caused a lot of consternation because it really did affect the scarce private land within the counties.
So what are we missing, guys, ladies and gentlemen?
Actually, that's pretty informative, actually.
Very.
Yeah, I like that.
So I'll add that we have some language from the comments that, you know, was basically a compromise language that said, you know, for heaven's sakes, coordinate with the counties and protect private property. So I'll add that. Because migration corridors will continue to be
Invasive
identified.
species.
Sorry, folks. Come on, cat, move along.
Speaking of wildlife.
Yeah.
Feral cats.
So you're gonna make the edits and the tweaks, Connie, and then get it back to Eric and myself or to all of us or whatever?
Well, I've taken notes and I'll send Eric my notes in
Yeah.
a track changes document. He's been doing an on-site as we go.
Oh, great,
Document.
okay.
Does that make sense, Eric?
Yep.
Okay. And then I'll forward the appendix and the glossary.
That's
Oh,
it.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So we plan on hearing this at our April Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, which will be April 13th. And that has been
Okay.
advertised. And so obviously we won't go through this entire document, but I will send it out as soon as I have it so you guys can read it for the hearing. And then we'll just, if there's any questions or concerns, and then we'll open it up to the public at that time also. It will go to the Board of County Commissioners at their April, the following week.
19th is gonna be a huge meeting, though. We've got the federal agencies coming in. We've
Oh,
got the
perfect
budgets
timing.
being presented. We've got budgets being presented and some other big thing on the schedule.
Yeah.
Don't do this, don't do this.
They'll be so excited.
It's gonna be a 2-day meeting. I better warn Jeff.
We're going to read the entire document to the Board of County Commissioners. It'll be a marathon meeting. Anyway, that's all I have, Madam Chair. I appreciate your time and us getting through the document and
Thank you, guys. This is a huge project. I feel like it's super important that we have this in place and I want to thank everybody for their time. Connie, Commissioner Toman, this is awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
We're not done with you. You'll probably have to get on the Zoom for the commissioners too.
That's okay.
I might have